Coombs. I'm the Adult Services Manager at MacArthur Library, and I am so thrilled to have Mary Lou Ciolfi here. Mary Lou is currently the Senior Program Manager at the University of Maine Center on Aging. She is a licensed Maine attorney with a master's degree in health policy. Mary Lou practiced law in Brunswick, Maine for 17 years and then worked as an administrator in a long-term care setting for 10 years. She worked in aging policy research for several years with colleagues at the University of Southern Maine's Muskie School on public service. She is an adjunct faculty member at the University of New England, where she has taught public health law and public health policy and mentors graduate public health students on policy-related theses. In 2020, Mary Lou completed the Reframing Aging Facilitator training provided by the Gerontological, okay, I can't say that word, Gerontological Society of America, the home of the National Reframing Aging Initiative. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Mary Lou Ciolfi. Thank you for being with us.
Boy, thank you, Melanie. And thank you for being here this afternoon with us. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Melanie, just give me a thumbs up. You can see that all right. Okay, very good. And I also want to, hang on a second, I want to put the chat visible. I'm hoping, I know that's a small audience out there, but I'm hoping that you will engage a little bit on the chat if you're able to do that. And maybe we can save a little bit of time at the end for just for conversation. So, I'm up for talking about ageism and how to recognize it pretty much any time of the year. But it really is great that the library is promoting Older Americans Month, and I really applaud you for doing that. I would totally love to make this session interactive. So I have a few questions embedded in here. If you feel comfortable answering in the chat, feel free. If not, that's fine too. We'll figure out another way. And I'm often speaking about ageism to aging services providers, and maybe some of you are, I don't know, but I don't often have an opportunity to speak to an audience of the general public. So I would welcome anybody's thoughts afterwards about, what resonates with you, what intrigues you, frustrates you, anything at all about your experiences with ageism. And I appreciate your story, Melanie, about your family member. All right, so what have we got here? I always get advertisements for Older Americans Month just because of the work that I do. And I like this year's poster, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, Age My Way. It comes out of the Administration for Community Living, which is the federal agency that manages this program. And I think they did a good job this year. I see I see gender diversity, I see diversity by ability and activities. But as I stared at this, I thought, now there's some things missing here. I don't know about all of you, but I don't see any drawings of like work or service or friendship. Each of these people is alone. And I thought, how curious. I don't know anything about the artist behind it, haven't looked into it, but it struck me that it might be also perpetuating a stereotype about older people that we are often alone. Not sure, just throwing it out there, something to think about. So I have about maybe 40 or so minutes of remarks, and then, as I said, we can hold some time at the end. What I want to cover is really just, what is ageism? Because even though we've heard that term, we don't always know exactly what it is, what the structure of it is, how it manifests in regular life. Even those of us who study it, and I spend a lot of time in this area, even those of us who study it don't always recognize it. It can be very covert. It's a little sneaky. It's been around for a long time, and so we've kind of blocked out some of the even obvious manifestations of ageism. So we'll talk about what it is, talk a little bit about how to address it. Just a spoiler alert, there's not a lot out there about that. We're in uncharted territory. Talk some about the impact on our health. And then I have put a little bit of information in here. It's a bit in the weeds and academic, but for anybody who's interested, we'll talk a bit about why we are such an ageist society. So for the few of you that are here, would you mind putting in the chat just how old you are? I would love to know the spectrum of age. among you, although I can kind of see a few of you. There's no pressure. If you don't want to put your age in there, that's fine. Okay, great. D's, yeah. And then along with that, tell me what age you would consider yourself to be old, that you would describe yourself as old. Typically, when we poll people about this, at what age would they consider themselves old, there's a ton of diversity. Okay, Melanie, 65, yep. Anybody else want to offer that? 80. Yeah, I'm with you, Susie. I would put it around 80 also. I've seen as young as 40. And I think those are mostly younger people. I don't always know, who gives me an answer. I've seen as young as 40 and then some people 80s, 90s, even above. So there's this huge range. We're living longer. So older people represent really 2+ generations, right? From, late 50s, 60-ish all the way to over 100 because we have more centenarians now than we have in years past. So, of course, the things that we say about older people, how we describe them, are not accurate for everybody within that 40, 50-year lifespan. And that's an important factor because there's certainly no other group of humans for which we come to these, stereotyped conclusions about how they act, what their characteristics are. So just to set the stage for our conversation, can I just play a couple of minutes? I'm not going to play the whole skit. This is a Saturday Night Live skit from probably a couple, 3 years ago. It's made the rounds on social media. Some of you may have seen it. Saturday Night Live has long been accused of being really ageist, and they are. But I feel like okay, Saturday Night Live is just a reflection of the culture at large. Saturday Night Live would not use these jokes if they thought people would be outraged or offended by them. And they know that we still find ageist jokes funny, so they keep using them. I'm hoping over the next few years that this will change. So let me start this. And if you want to see the rest of it, you can look it up on YouTube. I know it's so hard not to laugh, right? It's so hard. It's very funny. Um, what are the stereotypes there? Well, they just jump out at you. We're hard of hearing, we're confused, we're technologically completely inept, out of step, we're always cold, we have to be buried under a million blankets. Like it's just, I mean, obviously it's a parody of a parody, but it's humor at our expense. Like we just need to call it what it is. Um, humans are good, really good at dehumanizing the outgroup. And we celebrate so many brilliant insult comedians, and that insult comedy is also a studied thing, and that's what's happening here. We wouldn't tolerate now, Henny Youngman's, take my wife, please. Like we wouldn't say that anymore. But here we are in 2022, still making jokes about older people at their expense. So we have a ways to go. Funny as it is very ageist. All right. It's always helpful to start with definitions. How do we define ageism? This is Robert Butler. He is the gentleman who coined the term ageism 53 years ago in 1969. And I like to tell the story of how it came about because I think this is so interesting. So he was a psychiatrist mid-century in the 20th century. He was interviewed by Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post in 1969 about a housing project that was planned for down in Baltimore. It was apparently a lot of local resistance to the project, and Bernstein wanted to know from Butler, was racism a factor in the neighborhood? Butler said, no, no, it was ageism. The locals really don't want a lot of old people living in their community. So thus the term ageism was born half a century ago. And here we are still trying to understand it and address it. So Butler defined ageism as the systematic stereotyping of and discrimination against older people because they are old. So since 1969, we have broadened that definition to include, of course, discrimination against anyone, including our own selves, on the basis of any age, because young people are, in fact, the victims of ageism in many settings. I'll be candid. I don't know anything about ageism against young people other than sort of the technicalities. I don't know the psychological pathways and bases for ageism against young people. So my remarks today are really just about ageism directed towards older people. And you might be thinking, well, maybe I'm older. I know people who are older. I like being around older people. I can't possibly be ageist. But in last year, just over a year ago, March 2021, the World Health Organization published its global report on ageism, indicating that around the world, so not just in the US, a full half of us, 1 out of 2 people, are ageist towards older people. And some of us really do believe that this is underestimated. But even at 50%, right, this means that there's a very good chance that you're engaging in or experiencing ageism and ageist attitudes or behavior with a fair degree of frequency. That WHO report is really helpful in providing this super simple framework to help us understand the various categories of ageism. So our ageist thinking are those stereotypes that we just saw in that SNL clip. These are the mental shortcuts that we take to cause us to lump older people together as being out of touch or hard of hearing or always cold. And some of us are that. I actually am often cold, but not everybody is. And that's the nature of a stereotype. That's the danger and harm of stereotyping. Our ageist feelings are our negative biases and prejudices. If we don't like being around older people or avoid them for whatever reason, then we could be biased or potentially prejudiced against them, which is just a more extreme form of bias. And then finally, obviously, our acts of discriminatory behavior are the unjust treatment of older people. And we see that all over the place. Once we start looking for it, it's sometimes hard to see, but once you start looking, it's all around us. And as with the other isms, racism, sexism, ableism, classism, ageism exists at all levels of societal life. First, and probably most importantly, ageism can be directed at our own selves if we are older or on the brink of being older, however we define that. When we disparage our behavior, our forgetfulness, our you know, whatever characteristic we associate with aging solely on account of our age, then we're displaying that internalized ageism. Interpersonal ageism are the ageist thoughts, attitudes, and actions that we endure from others. So jokes. It's the SNL skit. It's the jokes, condescending attitudes, patronizing attitudes, the lack of recognition, lack of value of our contribution, our invisibility, right? And of course, since we've been stewing in ageist norms and of behavior for 1,000+ years, our societal institutions, all of our systems reflect that long history of ageism. It's embedded in our policies and in our structures, so much so that it's sometimes really hard to see it. But institutional ageism is a topic for another day because that's big. So as I move through this material, I would say keep in mind some of the most common messages that you hear about aging and older people, whether it's in your personal or professional life. And what are your own thoughts and feelings about aging yourself if you're older or soon to be an older person? Even benign behavior, often benign behavior, can be very ageist, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Although I have one story. So a friend of mine recently met up over Zoom. We hadn't seen one another during the pandemic. So she's around 70, just over 70, a widow of several years. And she told me that she had recently shared with her attorney, that just in casual conversation with her lawyer, that she, my friend, might start using one of the dating sites to find a companion. And can you guess what the attorney's first reaction was? The very first thing out of her mouth, she told my friend to be careful. Now, this friend of mine is a brilliant psychologist. She's still working and volunteering. She manages her beautiful home in Boston, her finances. She manages everything in her life. So even though this attorney, I'm sure, was so well intentioned, and I'm a lawyer, I get it, we want to protect, um, but she still had this very ageist paternalistic response as the first thing out of her mouth. So I'm not saying that the lawyer should never have cautioned the client. I mean, my friend was not there to be cautioned about finances. She was there for another matter. So it's rational that the attorney would have that response. Um, but the fact that it was the very first thing says something to us. She assumed that my friend, my accomplished, brilliant friend, wouldn't have the wherewithal or the sort of antenna for the bad actors that might be out there. It's a benign act. You can totally see how somebody might say that. It is a benign and ageist act. In fact, when I called it out to my friend, I think she was even taken aback. I don't even think she had recognized that there was some paternalism in this comment. So again, shows up everywhere. All right, so let's talk about the thinking part of ageism and these stereotypes. And again, feel free to put in the chat any of the words and phrases that you hear yourselves about older people that are used to describe us. You know, things like lonely, depressed, frail, sweet. That's the worst. Sweet little old lady. You hear it a lot. It is rare, although becoming maybe less rare, to see images of people doing non-stereotyped things. I love this photograph. It is a wonderful photo of a gentleman at a cafe. No stereotyping. He's just sitting there enjoying coffee. He could be 20, he could be somebody who was 25 or 40 or 50 or 90. I give this a thumbs up. But I had to go to a website in the UK to find images of older people doing regular things because most of what is out there on the internet is very, very stereotyped. It looks more like this. We are often stereotyped as lonely, depressed, bored, isolated. And again, some older people are. I'm not saying we shouldn't pay attention to them. We do. But we're constantly, like we as in everybody, is constantly exposed to words and phrases, images in the mainstream media, in social media, in memes. They depict us as pathetic, and we often see photos, very often, start looking for them, of wrinkly hands, these idle, disembodied hands that accompany so many articles about anything in late life. So I give that photo a thumbs down. Now there might be some contexts in which that would be appropriate. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there might be. This is so much better, right? This gentleman, again, he could be of any age, working in his shed, looks like he's fixing something. That's that's great. That also came from the UK, as is this one. It's really rare to see older people, images of older people engaging with technology, since the entire world assumes that we don't know how to use the latest device or the most updated software. Such a ubiquitous stereotype, and I'm tired of it. There have been so many times when I have had to teach my younger colleagues how to work something or do something technological. And this is from TikTok. And I don't use TikTok a lot. I'll scroll through occasionally just for, giggles, but there is a lot of dreadful content out there that's very ageist. So this guy says, you can, I'm not, I only took a screenshot of it. He says, I sentence you to helping old people with their computers over the phone. Like that is punishment to try to help an old person over the computer, over the phone, help them with their computer. We are internalizing these negative stereotypes because we hear them so frequently. They're repeated and repeated. They start to infect our own thinking and our own belief systems. So we start believing these things about ourselves. It's so sad. It impacts how we function. It impacts our health. It impacts our own self-worth. And you do see a lot of this on TikTok, actually all sorts of social media. Adult children complaining about how painful it is to help their parents with their computers. But the truth of it is, and here's the point, there are people of every age and every gender and every persuasion that need help fixing their computers. And therein lies the problem with stereotyping, right? So we need to cut that out and call it out when we can. So here's something for you to consider. We're maybe too small an audience to have a conversation in the chat, but feel free to add your thoughts. I get this question all the time, and we are still debating it in my professional circles. Should older people adapt to a changing tech world, or should the tech world adapt to an aging world? or maybe something in between, although you tend to see it as a binary. There's a lot of pressure on older people to keep up with changing technology, and it's changing really fast. It's also very expensive to keep up. Um, and what if older people do want to keep up with the changing times, but find that the functionality is difficult for older eyes or older fingers or older ears and hearing? So then what? How do we do it in a way that is helpful to us and effective? There was a recent article in Next Avenue, which comes to my inbox. And if you're interested in following issues around aging, I really like it. The articles they publish are current and they often cite the research that they're talking about. So it's good. So this article is just from February 2022, Ageism in the Self-Checkout Lane. And it goes on to describe how difficult it is for some older people to interface with the self-checkout. And the author here was sort of maligning the tech designers for not including input from all types of potential users, including older people. And so we end up with hardware and maybe software too that's really difficult for a large subset of users. It needs to be bigger print, brighter imaging, just more user-friendly interface. And that's good for everybody. It made me wonder, reading this article and thinking about this, I thought, why aren't we using universal design principles all over the place? The housing industry knows all about universal design, and I think other industries too. They're designing for the broadest audience possible. Why aren't we using some of that science, some of that research in other areas of technological innovation? I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you because we're an ageist society, that's probably top of the list. I'd be curious to know how you all think about that, and maybe just reflect on it when you're out and about with older people. See how they react to technology that's out there in the just our regular daily lives. All right, what about feelings? So how does our and others' attitudes about aging show up in messaging, in life? It can be also very, very subtle. So I'm curious your reaction to this image. This is just from Google Images. And you might think first glance, okay, well, what's wrong with that? It's nice. Somebody's showing care and concern, maybe compassion. Yeah, and they are. I would say our reaction to it maybe depends on the context, or the use of that image should depend on the context. My sense of this is that it assumes that whoever is seeing this photograph, that this posture, this kind of touching is okay with all older people. That if you're older, this is a good thing. You should like this. But that is not the case. I would not want to be looked at or touched in that kind of pitiable, paternalistic way, patronizing way, um, unless maybe it was my adult daughter. The assumptions about what feelings we project towards older people should be the same as it is for everybody else. We shouldn't assume anything about older people and what they want. And yet we do. We feel free to assume that in this instance, that all older people would see this display of compassion and concern as a good thing. But maybe they don't even need compassion and concern. Maybe even if they need it, they don't want it like that or from that person. But the designers of the advertisement or the photo obviously think that we should all like this. We don't have to like it. And nobody's asking us. Why aren't they asking us? This study is from 2017. It was a study of physicians, nurses, and social workers in Israel. And one of the lead author, Ben Harush, and his colleagues found some very interesting themes when they asked these physicians, nurses, and social workers about working with older people. And this is what they found, that there is a perception of difficulty working with older patients. And they said, the nurses and doctors and social workers said, they don't let me help them. They want attention. They approach you every second. It's a thankless job. They said more. There are issues with invisibility and discriminatory communication patterns, the authors found, the researchers found. Providers sometimes choose the way it's easiest for them to do the work as opposed to what is best for the patient. There's a tendency to treat older patients like they're absent present. So we see them, but we don't really pay attention to them, pay attention to their needs. There's use of condescending and infantilizing language. They bypass older patients and approach a younger family member. We see that everywhere. Melanie's story at the beginning was about a retail experience. So it happens in healthcare, it happens everywhere, and it's really not okay. So I give this a big thumbs down. However, it is the prevailing view in healthcare. Like this is from just a couple of years ago, and you would surely find the same thing today. If I take away all the language in those quotes and just leave the words that describe older patients, this is what is left. We're difficult, we're absent, it's thankless work, we're invisible, we want attention, we're condescended to, we're infantilized, and we're bypassed. Like, that's sad. It's sad, but it's real. This is real. Maybe give some thought to whether any of these things have happened to you. They have happened to me. Even I'm 62. Um, I'm pretty sure some of these things happened before I turned 60. Been called dear, honey, sweetie, young lady, that's the worst, by strangers or almost strangers, right? I see some nodding heads. Yes, it's true. This happens all the time. Been offered help when we don't need it, like whether that's physical help, somebody speaking loudly to us. People have offered technology help to me. I feel like I'm pretty much up with the latest technology, but people just offer it unsolicited. Have you ever had someone assume that you can't understand something, whether it's a document or a process or a medical procedure? I sure have. I I've taken to actually dressing up for my healthcare appointments because I don't want people to assume that I don't know anything. So if I dress up in my professional pre-COVID lawyer garb, they're less likely to assume that. So that's a big lift for me just to have somebody not assume something bad about me. But that's where we're at. Well, how should we respond to all of this? This question fascinates me. And again, this is a spoiler alert. There's very, very little out there. I cannot offer you very much help. I'm so sorry. And I should come back in a year or two and see if there's any updates. There's very little known about how we should respond to ageist behavior and actions and attitudes so that we don't just invite more backlash or more bad feelings about ourselves. But I can offer you something. I recently learned about a researcher in Toronto, Alice Chasteen, and her colleagues. They're the only folks I know who are studying specifically the perceptions of older people who respond to various types of ageist behavior. In other words, how is the older person perceived when they call out ageist behavior? So she published this paper last year, 2021, so it's very current. And her study categorized benevolent ageism, like gently helping somebody cross the street, and hostile ageism, forcefully and forcibly helping somebody cross the street, like, come on, let's go. And then she categorized responses to those actions by the older person according to three categories. No confrontation, so the older person just went along and crossed the street, accepting the help. Moderate confrontation, which is no, I can do it myself. Or strong confrontation, which was get out of here, I can do this myself, that kind of thing. So no confrontation, moderate confrontation, strong confrontation. Interestingly, but maybe not surprisingly, the study concluded several things, but here's the one thing. The stronger we confront these, helpful, benevolent acts, the more negatively we older people are perceived by the precipitator of the ageism. So in other words, if someone benevolently helps me cross the street and I react strongly, like strong confrontation, the more negatively I will be perceived as an older person. So, what does that mean for us when we want to call out Ageism. What does it mean for us when we want to say to somebody, don't call me hun? If we say, what is wrong with you? Stop calling me that in a strong confrontational way, we risk being viewed negatively, more negatively than we might have otherwise. It's frustrating to think that this is where we're at. Like we don't know what to do. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I've experienced ageism in healthcare settings and I haven't responded and I'm not sure today, knowing what I know, I'm not sure what decision I would make about calling it out. It's really hard and maybe that's my point is look, this is not easy stuff. We're all still learning how to sort this out. Do the best you can with it and do not feel bad if you let it go. I would say maybe, we all need to practice. Maybe we could just sit quietly at our desks at home and put together a few scripts, practice with our family members. I don't know. I do think it is important that we call ageism out. I really do. Uh, but we don't have a lot of guidance right now about how to do it effectively. And by effectively, I would say in ways that preserve our own identity, if you will, in ways that gets the message across to the offender that their actions are not okay. I'm going to continue to follow Dr. Chastain's research. So again, maybe I'll have some updates in a year or two. Fascinating stuff. All right. So what about our language? What are the words and phrases we should be using so we're not perpetuating ageist views, ageist stereotypes, ageist attitudes? And some of this might be familiar terrain for you. Most of us humans are in total denial of our own aging. And because even when we're old, there's always going to be somebody older than us, unless you're the oldest person on the planet. We do tend to refer to older people as they, as if they belong to some other group that we will never belong to, which is, of course, not true. When we refer to older people as they, even when we're older ourselves, it prevents us from talking and thinking about our collective responsibility, right? As people who live in this society, our collective responsibility to create a better world so that we can all age more comfortably, more securely, more inclusively. So instead, let's refer more to we and us instead of they or them. I would say generally you can eliminate elderly from your vocabulary. You certainly can eliminate the elderly because that just paints us as one big monolith with no diversity whatsoever. So that can go. Elderly, I mean, when I say the word, I'm sure that the image in your head is somebody who is frail and sick and declining, right? Like that's what that conjures up for us. And there are, of course, older people who are frail, people who are nearing end of life who fit that description. So if you, for whatever reason, want to continue to use the word elderly, at the very least, reserve it for the people who are truly frail, either medically frail or some other aspect of frailty. Seniors is a tough one. Seniors is tough. You still hear it. It's in the names of a lot of programs and a lot of policy. Like it's embedded in a lot of laws and regulations at the state and federal level. So it's hard to eliminate that. Organizations don't want to change the name of their own organization or their program, so it's tough. I think I would say I'd use it as little as possible because it doesn't conjure up frailty so much as it does just something else that's negative, maybe outdated or irrelevant. Not necessarily a good thing. So instead, and maybe you're already doing this, older person, older people is so neutral, right? We don't associate it with anything bad or good. It just is. It's like young people. They're just younger. So older person, older people is preferred. Older adult, also used widely. It's totally fine. The research shows that when we use the term older adult, the public generally thinks of somebody a little bit younger, like in their 50s or early 60s. Older person, they tend to think a little bit older in their later 60s. So there is a fine difference there, according to the Frameworks Institute that did this research back about 8 years or so ago. But I think what you hear now is that those are pretty interchangeable terms. Use us or all, we as much as you can. And then don't forget that you can bracket ages. We can say people over 60, people between the ages of 60 and 70, depending on our context, depending on our message. It's very effective, and it's not dripping with anything. It's just the age. It's just a chronological age. And keep an eye out for the negativity that we so often associate with aging and older people. I mean, it just flits off our tongue, right? I'm having a senior moment, or still hear silver tsunami and gray wave and over the hill. It just reinforces the negative views about aging. I don't want to suggest that everything about aging is wonderful. So don't take that away from my remarks. Uh, Being older is like any other stage in life. There's lovely things about it and there's dreadful things about it. The problem with aging is that we have so long associated it with negative things that the negative vocabulary and phrases that we have around aging are far more common, far more ubiquitous than the positive things. So we need to shift that a little bit. And that's what we need. We need to bring some awareness to it so that we can do that mindfully and with intention. What I personally object to, and other people that I work with, is the general statement that people can't do something or won't do something solely because of their age, and not because they're making just a choice as a human being. Choices are great. We have to preserve the dignity of choice for older people, just like we have preserved it for other ages. And what can you say instead? This takes a little bit of practice. Again, for this very same reason, we're swimming upstream a little bit here. The goal of addressing ageism is to tell the real story, like the whole story about aging without resorting to these overgeneralizations. So just pay attention to the goal of whatever communication you're crafting, whether it's you're talking to your family or your neighbors or you're at a meeting, whatever you're trying to say, just be as precise as possible when it comes to aging and older people. And I would say, again, we should be sitting down at our desk, making a list of the words and phrases that we might associate with the reality of having accumulated a lifetime of experiences, knowledge, skills, because we have. I've lived 62 years. I have some things to say about all of that. It can take a little practice. Sometimes it feels wooden and kind of contrived to say positive things about aging, but there's a lot of us trying to do that work, and you can get on the bus with us. It's great. You may have seen the Boston Age Strong Commission's advertising campaign. It's lovely and beautifully done. They have taken attitudes and stereotypes about older people and turned them into strengths. And it really is a brilliant way to counteract negative messaging. And the only caveat I have here is some of the things like frailty, like one of the ads uses not senile but frail. And Becca Levy, I think it was Becca Levy, who's the author. She's a researcher down at Yale, and she's the author of a brand new book on aging. And she said, when she was talking about Boston's advertising campaign, she said, people are going to eventually become frail. Like we all become frail near end of life. So maybe we don't want to give the impression that nobody ever becomes frail. And I appreciated that point. I thought that was so smart. Um, but a lot of the other words and phrases that we associate with aging are not automatic. It's not true that every old person is going to become senile. I urge you to go on their website and take a look at the ads. They're very well done if you haven't seen them. All right, in my last few minutes, just, how is ageism hurting us and hurting our communities? 20% of us, 1 in every 5 patients over the age of 50, experience age discrimination in a healthcare setting. So this metric is from a 2015 study, and the data comes from the National Health and Retirement Study and the findings that were gleaned from that survey from 2008 to 2012. So it's a little bit old, but these have not been updated to my knowledge, although I perhaps need to go looking. The specific question in the survey is, in your day-to-day life, how often have you received poorer services or treatment than other people from doctors and hospitals? So a full 20% of us, 1 in 5 over 50, said that they did. And 29%, almost 30% of those who reported frequent discrimination developed new or worsened symptoms over the next 4 years. So that's kind of alarming. So a third of patients who experience discrimination frequently are sicker. So there's a lot of ageism in healthcare, and it's really making older patients quite sick. It really does require a public health approach, perhaps, to addressing ageism. Public health approach and many other types of approaches, but that's certainly one. This also is Becca Levy's research, now 20 years old, but still very important and relevant. She and her colleagues found that if we have more positive self-perceptions of aging, we may live longer, up to 7.5 years longer. For me and for lots of older people, these extra years of life are precious to us, more time with our children and our grandchildren. So the sooner we start reframing the way that we think and feel and act about our own aging and the aging of our friends and family and colleagues, the better off we're going to be, and hopefully the longer that we'll live. How great is that? There's other research out there that shows that when we have negative self-perceptions of aging, it contributes to poorer performance. Though this is a 2018 study, the researchers looked at the impact of ageism and sexism on the health of older women, and they found that it led to poorer performance on memory and math tests, stronger stress responses doing certain activities, which included math problems, lower willingness to take risks, lower scores on perceived health, and more hospitalizations. There were a few others, like our handwriting is worse. So there's a functional component to internalized ageism. And again, I would love to hear, ways that you all think healthcare encounters could be more accommodating for older people. In recent mainstream media articles where they've interviewed older patients, they have said, absolutely, we do not want the doctors and the nurses talking to our adult children before they talk to us. Like that happens across the board. If you have other ideas about how healthcare encounters could be less ageist, I would love to hear from you. You can feel free to email me, but certainly put them in the chat because it's a big and important issue. We need to make a healthcare system more friendly to older people. And we are starting. I don't want to paint it all negative. We are starting to listen to older patients. We're hearing their complaints and trying to make some amends. That's all good. And I'll just spend my last minute telling you a little bit about why we are ageist. We come by it innocently. We've been steeped in this for hundreds of years. So what does that mean for us? Whenever I speak about ageism, I remind audiences that we have these really long-standing ageist activities in our past with the rise of the patriarchy in Europe and the marginalization and really the persecution of older women. And it is mostly older women because we were the healers and the midwives of society, and we clashed with the European monarchs and the rise of the Christian church. So the witch imagery is particularly awful for older people and older women, and that started in the mid 1600s and of course continues to this day. And that witch imagery just sends this message out that we older women are ugly, we're evil, we snatch children, we have lots of power to do evil. We don't use it for good. And there's an entire genre of movies featuring evil old women, and it's called hagsploitation. You can look that up. It's awful. So we grew up with all of that. Though the persecution of and marginalization of older women fed the development of all of those fables over the years, and so we've been reading those stories ourselves. We read them to our children. We've internalized all of those negative associations with older women and older people generally. And once we've internalized that, it's really hard to shake it off. It just takes a lot of conscious, consistent effort over time. So we know, those of us working in the ageism space, we know we're in for the long haul. And again, I don't want to suggest that there are no fables or movies or positive messaging about older people or older women. There are, but they're not the prevailing view, that's for sure. That third photo is a photo of an almshouse in late in the late 19th century. And almshouses for the poor and the old and the sick were the precursors to our current nursing homes. So is it any wonder that nursing homes have a bad reputation? And along with that physical warehousing of older people, we brought along the attitudes and beliefs that older people didn't need to have their things around them. They didn't need privacy. They didn't need dignity. So we plucked them from their homes and took away all their things and took away all their privacy and made them share a room at the end of life, which is dreadful. And of course, now after the pandemic, we're finally starting to see the light. And we've been treating older people, particularly older people with disabilities, very badly for a very long time. So it has prompted a national discourse, national dialogue about the reform of our long-term care system. So there's a brand new report out just 2, maybe 3 weeks ago from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, 600 pages on long-term care reform. So whether that gets political cover, I don't know. Whether there's ever going to be any funding coming out of Congress for the recommendations in that report, I don't know. Remains to be seen. But the good news is we now have some roadmaps. That's a lot of progress. And will we ever be in a post-ageist society where older people are seen first and foremost as experienced, as contributors, as lovely and beautiful? Don't know. Jury is still out. I don't think the jury is out on whether it will happen. The jury is definitely still out on when. But all the more reason for us to do the work that we can do. Small work, big work, whatever you can manage will all make a difference. So there's a few theories that help to explain ageism. I'm just going to tell you quickly about one, and that is human death anxiety. That existential dread, terror in the face of our own mortality, is a phenomenon across human cultures. It's been the subject of literature and the arts since the dawn of time, of course, but it has only been studied in the social science lab for the past 40 years or so. And it's only been studied to explain ageism for the past 10 or 15 years. So it's very new. But as of right now, it is the leading explanation of ageism towards older people. So the theory explains that since we have an innate fear of death and dying, we naturally recoil and distance ourselves and think negatively about reminders of our own mortality, including older people. So there have been several studies that confirm that relationship between ageism and death anxiety, but we're still, as a research community, still teasing out some of the nuances. It's a very complex interplay, um, including human disgust response, fear of pathogens, fear of people who are different from us. Humans are complex creatures, so it takes the research community a little while to figure this out. So keep an eye out for death anxiety talk. The theory is called terror management theory, which is so interesting. And for now, I would say read more, reflect more, talk more about aging and illness and disability and dying with your family, with your intimates, with your friends, with your colleagues. Look at all aspects of existence in the eye. Just look them straight in the eye and examine them as best you can. Question all the assumptions that you have. Since this is an audience of readers, I do want to recommend this book. It's called The Worm at the Core. And the three authors, Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pazinski, are the three psychologists who developed terror management theory back in the mid to late 1980s. And they explain how our death anxiety impacts our behavior. Fascinating stuff. The three of them have published hundreds of articles in the academic literature, but they also wrote this book for the general public. It was published in 2015. I really recommend it if you have an interest in this topic at all. I think you will find it really engrossing. But they end on a really lovely high note. And they say, sort of what I said a minute ago, come to terms with death. Really grasp that being mortal, while terrifying, can infuse us with courage, compassion, and concern for future generations. Like, I can get behind that. I'm showing you the picture because I love this picture. It's an older photo of the three of them, but they look like rock stars. It looks like the cover of an album from the 1980s, right? And it looks like they have had so much fun working together over decades. I don't know if they have or not, but there they are, Sheldon, Greenberg, and Pasinski. So I'm going to wrap up with just a reminder that awareness is the key to understanding and addressing our own ageism, directed at ourselves. Uh, Maybe we are even ageist towards others. So be aware of, just notice when you stereotype, when others stereotype. Notice those negative comments and the patronizing and condescending comments that you hear. Try to say positive things. Sometimes it can be hard. If you feel comfortable doing so, bring it to somebody's attention. I think we can simply say things like, if we hear elderly or the elderly, I think we can say older person is now the preferred term, or I've learned that older person is now the preferred term, and just stop right there. If they ask for more information, you get to decide how much you want to go into what you know about ageism and our long history. I would say just practice. It's what I'm doing, and feel free to come along. Zero tolerance for jokes. This is really hard. It's really hard, but we have to do it. The jokes are awful, and they're everywhere. Keep antenna out for that overly compassionate ageism. The helping stuff can go a little too far. Successful aging. Successful aging is a term I personally don't like. Others don't like it because it connotes that there's failure at aging, and there is no failure at aging. Super agers are great. They're the people who are climbing mountains and they're 95. They're fabulous and they should be heralded and celebrated. Those can't be the only people that we celebrate. We can't only talk about aging in terms of superagers. Most of us are not going to age superbly, and I won't. So let's celebrate aging in general. The fact that we're living at all, at whatever age, is somewhat of a miracle. And of course, that self-deprecating humor, the humor that we direct at ourselves. Just try to stop. All right, think about what you can do starting like right now to be less ageist. There's lots of options here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This is Mona. I just have a few comments. This was very good, by the way. Thank you very much. As to calling it out, one of the things that I do repeatedly is if someone is trying to help me and I don't need it, my response is, I'm just fine right now. I'll let you know if I need your help. And it seems to work. And it's how you present it. If you're firm and confident, it's okay. They get the picture. I had an interesting experience a few years ago. I was at an interview session for a group of high school students for the company that I worked with, the last company that I worked with before I retired. And there was a young woman. We were walking to the interview room, and I was probably the oldest interviewer there. This is a company that had a very young population. And in an effort to try to be nice and impress me, the young high schooler said to me, "You look like someone who must bake the best cookies." And I said, I do like to bake cookies. And when I'm not climbing mountains, I do that.
Excellent.
So I hope I enlightened her, because it was the truth. I mean, I do like to bake, but I like to climb mountains too. The other thing that you mentioned was universal design. And I just want to comment on that. Not just for older people. Universal design is helpful for people, non-native speakers, people who are just coming, immigrants. It's good for all kinds of people. So yes, I would fight for that, definitely. Mm-hmm. The other is that if I find myself in a situation where the conversation tends to go toward aging and ability, I just take my age off the table as an issue and I bring it up right away. Well, I'm 70, but this is what I do. Or I'm 70 and I do this, that, and the other. And so it becomes a non-issue. That seems to help a lot. I've not experienced a lot of issues with my doctor because she's fabulous and she's been with me for 18 years. But I have in emergency room situations a couple of times and with specialists. So one of the things that I do now is I take out my iPhone and I say, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to record this visit so that I don't forget anything when I get home. And I don't think they can tell you no. No one has ever said no to me. And so that seems to put them on the right track.
Mona, good for you. That is awesome. That's an awesome list of things that you're doing. It's so empowering. And I think you are
Yeah.
so right on about calling out the age thing right out of the gate. Like,
Yeah.
there's a movement, I don't know if it has a hashtag, but it probably does because everything has a hashtag, about just owning your age. Like, let's just say let's just say how old we are and not be ashamed of it. It's great.
Yeah.
So,
It shouldn't be an issue from the start. It doesn't matter
right, right,
how old
exactly.
they are. And I have been horribly guilty of ageism towards young people. I really have. And I think that coming to grips with that and exploring it and examining it inwardly myself made me much more aware and made me a better person, I think. Because I began to the company, like I said, the company I worked for had a very young population. I may have been the oldest person there, and I realized that they have a lot to offer. I mean, they've lived their lives very differently than me, and they do have an awful lot to offer. And I learned a lot from them, and some of them are still my friends. So
I, I
it's it's
again,
worth it.
good. It is. And I tell myself all the time to remain open-minded about what young people can offer. I agree with you. I feel the same way. It has changed my relationship with younger people, not only my own millennial children, but I work with a lot of young people also. In other talks that I've given, we talk about intergenerational tension that exists out there in society and is really promoted by mainstream media and social media. So we are internalizing all of that tension that doesn't really exist. It's fabricated, engineered tension between the generations. So again, it's so great that you're aware, and I hope that you're talking to all sorts of people about your experiences so they'll learn from you because you have.
I've helped a few friends.
Good for you. Very good.
I just wanted to say thank you again for coming because I've learned so much from Susan Weary and from you and from the people that, like, as we started to go into this as Older Americans Month, we've learned a lot as well. And we were asked to, because of our embracing this month, we were asked to present at the Maine Library Association. And my colleague, Joe, I don't know if he's still on because I know that they were switching around monitoring the Zoom room. When we decided to present, we were like, oh, we're going to be up in Bethel. We should go for a quick hike because I'm hearing all these other mountain climbers. So we decided to go hiking, and we thought our session was going to be in the morning and then we'd be able to hike, but it was in the afternoon. So we went hiking and we decided to make the point that you're saying, that rather than change, we went in our grubby hiking clothes with our backpacks and everything that we would carry with us. So we went up Mount Will, and then we went in and we said, you know what, we're here, we're in this community that we're talking about, and we're coming in our hiking clothes to make the point that you cannot lump everybody together.
Yes. Yes.
So it
Yes.
worked great.
Yeah. No, we humans, we love to categorize. I mean, it does make things easier when we categorize people and things and sort them. And it's very harmful. It can be potentially very dangerous and harmful to our own selves and our relationships. So, yeah, bravo.
Yeah, so it was really fun. The other point that we made was at the beginning of the session, we asked everybody in the room whether they had a story hour at their library. And of course, they're all librarians, they raised their hands. And then we said, what about a teen space? Do you have a teen space? Now, would you do your story hour with the teens? Then why do you think every single program in the library fits an entire, 40 or 50 year population? And so I hope that, I hope that just our little impact will impact other libraries so that, maybe people will start perceiving things a little bit differently.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's one of those systems, Melanie, right? Like this is the way that libraries approach their programming is a structural problem. Now, it shouldn't take because of the nature, I think, of librarians. I don't think it's going to be a heavy lift to shift their attitudes. I don't know too many librarians, but I know a few. And I would hope that they would be open to adapting to a changing demographic.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure being here.
This was great. And just so you know, we've recorded this session and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel. If there's any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure that Mary Lou gets any questions that people send to us at all. So
Thank
thanks
you.
again.
All right. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.